Hi, welcome to Practical Wisdom Stories, Soul Searching. My name is Nikki Kleppel, and our guest today is Dee Brake. Welcome, Dee.
Welcome. Thanks, Nikki, for having me. I feel this is exciting because I haven't talked to you in a long time.
Yeah, have you been on a podcast or a talk show before?
I have not ever been on one. My husband does them all the time. He runs one, but I have never been on one.
All right. Hey, so it's good to always have firsts here. The
That's right.
reason that I reached out to you is I saw on LinkedIn that you have a new job, and a big piece of that was following a manager. And so, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, especially in COVID or times, kind of upheaval is like not a time to be looking for a job. And still, I'm so curious, like what, life lessons you've learned of interviewing and changing jobs in the middle of the season of COVID and probably doing things virtually. What advice might you give to our listeners?
Okay, well, I chose to change jobs. I hadn't lost my other job. It was there, right? But something about me is that I'm more than a lot of years into my corporate career, and at this point in my career I really am solid on the things that I want to be doing and the things that just do not work for me. They don't feed me or they drain me, and I had gotten to the point where I was starting to think about retiring early, because I also have an academic career where I'm a professor part-time, and so I was like, is it time maybe? But I had this opportunity come up, through an old manager, a former manager, who I just had so much respect for. He's just a great people manager. He's a great person in general, but he's a great people manager. And what I mean by that is he really invests the time to get to know his people and vice versa. He's very open about who he is and shares things about himself so that there's this kind of mutual understanding and common ground and respect that goes on. And he's just super good. He's a coach by nature, and he's super good at seeing the potential, not just the current, but what could be, and then coaching people through that. And my experience of working with him in the past was so good and so strong that I thought, you know what, I think I might. I think I might, be open to listening to what he has in mind. And it was a different company, which, in the time of COVID, I was thinking, do I really want to switch companies? But I'm at this point where, financially speaking, it wasn't a big risk for me to move. And I knew that I wanted to be happy and fulfilled, and I want to work for people that invest in me and trust me, and that made it an easy decision. So I said, you know what? Yes, let's do this. Let's take the risk. And so I've been in the new role this is my third week, and I'm pretty much drinking from the fire hose. But it's a good tired. It's a good thing to be working for somebody that who trusts you and you trust them. And you just know that they are going to be there to back you up, and whatever comes in front of me by way of the job responsibilities, I know I've got somebody there that's going to coach me through it. Even if I fall down, he's not going to be someone that's going to be like, you missed something. It's going to be more like, hey, what did we learn from that? Or well, how do you think that went? He's really good at that. He's really good at asking questions. Just say, well, how do you think that went? How do you think you did on that, and stuff? And so I'm really enjoying it, and it's primarily because of him.
That's amazing too. And I love you're very specific about like the questions he asks and the care and the time and being vulnerable, sharing things, that, really you're painting a picture of someone who's a very human, that wholehearted type of a leader. So that's great advice, that, I think, like this podcast is practical wisdom. There's like the practical pieces that managers can do, and then there's also that wisdom or the kindness, and really it sounds like it's the two of those, how they work together, that created that loyalty in you. What about just going through interview season right now? How is that different, and what advice would you give to people who are interviewing virtually?
the virtual nature was definitely new because, I mean, aside from a phone screen, I think most of my career I've done interviews in person, sitting
Yeah.
across from somebody and having people float in and out of the room. And so just the sheer logistics of multiple Zoom meetings or Teams meetings and clicking through and getting that straightened out was one thing. But it was great when we had the video camera on so we could at least see people, because without that, that really puts me at a disadvantage because I pay attention to nonverbal cues quite heavily. And if I was only hearing a voice, I think that would put me off guard a little bit, right?
Right. So make sure that video's on and ask for that connection.
Right, because
Did you
you
ever
want,
have to ask for it? Did they always have it on video?
no, they always had it on,
Okay,
which
good.
was good. It was
Yeah.
really good. Yeah, without that, you know, you want to see if someone's kind of looking, you know, if they cock their head sideways or they kind of like you say something and you can tell by their facial expressions that they're not quite following you,
Right,
then you
right.
want to be able to react to that and back up and shift your story or stuff. And so that video camera thing is very important in my opinion.
Yeah.
The other thing that was different for me this time around that maybe hasn't been in the past, and it may not have nothing to do with COVID and the virtual and everything to do just where I am in life right now, is I was very solid that it was a two-way interview process, that it wasn't just, I'm begging you for a job and, you know, please grill me on all the questions about my skills and stuff. I took it very much like, I am also here to decide whether I even want to work with you
Right.
or not. And I think that mental shift is really helped me not be so nervous and stuff, because I was, you know, I felt like I was on equal footing with them. It was like,
Mm,
you want me to work for you? I'd maybe like to work for you, but let's figure that out together. And I'm not sure that I had that a whole lot in my career. I think other
sure.
times I've interviewed, it's been largely, you know, and some of it is a female thing, right? Because especially females in tech, we tend to be really thankful that someone even considers us as a potential candidate, instead of being confident in ourselves that, you know, hey, I'm a great catch, and
Yes.
I'm here to figure out if you're good enough to catch me. You
Yeah.
know?
God, I love that. That's so inspiring, Dee. I think that is such an
Right, though,
empowering
that mental shift for
message.
me was very different. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
very different this time around. Like I said, I don't think it had anything to do with COVID as much as just this point in my life.
Yeah.
I was very solid with, I'm a good catch,
I
and I'm going
love
to see
that.
if you're good enough to catch me.
That's so helpful. I think especially for, all the people, particularly women who, maybe have that imposter syndrome
Hmm.
or, have that inner critic in their mind. So thank you for framing it that way.
Hmm.
It's just reminding that interviews really are that two-way street, and that it's like, hey, I've got a lot to offer here. So let's see, if you're ready
That's
for
right.
me, and
That's
not
right.
just like, oh, be desperate for them to have us. So thank you. That's
Hmm.
awesome. How did you develop that sense of confidence? Somebody wants to be able to kind of have some of that moxie that you're showing of like, yeah, I am a good catch. How
Yeah.
how did you get that way?
You know, some of it was, you know, I've been through two Dale Carnegie courses with you, both the basic when I first started at my old company, and then the advanced skills, skills for success,
Yeah.
maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I guess. And both of those helped bolster me. And I'm a big learner. And the more I delved in and learned and took things like that, where I not only, you know, the golden book is really great and learn those things, but the practicum in my experience, right,
Mm.
that safe place to practice some things that weren't natural to me, um, really, and then getting that positive feedback from you and my cohort members, and it was awesome, right? All those things just really bolstered me up. But I also got really active in diversity and inclusion work. And the more I delved into diversity and inclusion work, I went and got a
Mhm.
certification from Cornell University in D&I. The more I started to understand as a woman, and I just, you know, and as a woman of a certain age, there are lots of things that I bring to the table. And I also started figuring out some of the things that were self-inflicted, where I viewed myself as something maybe less or not good enough to be at the table and stuff, and tried to figure out why I felt that way. And so I would say my D&I work has, made me kind of turn the lens on myself
Mm-hmm.
as to why I've let others in their, the way I've been treated over the years in tech, convince me that I was something less than.
Was
And
there an assignment, or like what was that process? If you could pass along maybe the most pivotal part of that training that you did
sure,
that we could benefit from too.
yeah, it's, it really has to do with self-reflection. So if you think about a time when you felt really less than in a work environment, right? So as females, especially females in tech, we tend to be talked over a lot, interrupted a lot, things like that. So one of the exercises we did was to think about a time where something happened in the workplace where you felt completely shut down, stepped over, or felt less than what you were. And then try to understand, which some of this I think relates to Dale Carnegie, is where might that other person, the person that was the source of that non-inclusive behavior, right? Were they evil? No, probably not evil, right? But what might they be going through? What might be their backstory? Did they have good intent? Are they aware that they're even doing this? And then really marrying that with knowledge about, unconscious bias,
Mm-hmm.
microaggressions, and various things like that. And then reflect and say, well, what would you do differently next time around, right? Would you let it affect you? Would you stop it in the moment? If you were to talk to the person in the moment or later, what would you say about how that impacted you? And that just made my brain start thinking about, why did I let them make me feel like I was less, right? And why would I let somebody repeatedly interrupt me? And how might I stop that without being ugly or meeting aggression with aggression, right? And just going through all that, Nikki, is it just makes you start thinking about how you respond to things or react to things. And then is there a different way that you can do it that could not only help you, but help any other women in the room and help the person that's the source, and doing it in a way, and this goes back to Dale Carnegie, to where nobody loses face,
Right.
right? That you do it in a way where you believe they probably had good intent. These are either bad habits that they have gotten into or something, and they aren't aware of the impact to you,
Right.
right? And we often put impact and intent on top of each other like they're one and the same, and they're not, right? And the person probably did not intend anything negative, but the impact was negative. So your ability to stay on the impact when you're talking to the person, like, when you interrupted me several times, that made me lose my thought. And then I completely left off a key point I knew I wanted to land. And that kind of impact. So in the future, if you have questions, it would be so awesome if you'd wait to the end, so you make sure I get all my points out. And then I'm so happy to debate, the merits of what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried that, and it worked a few times. So I would say that exercise of just understanding why you do the things you do, and then maybe giving the other person the benefit of the doubt and figuring out how you can focus on the impact to correct the behavior and not the intent, which kind of questions their character.
Yeah. Oh, well, first of all, you're very articulate in how you framed it for us and create this framework for us, and I think there's a couple of, questions along the ways, giving people the benefit of the doubt. That is a huge piece of it, but it's also not the whole intent, so, but it maybe makes things less personal if we realize, okay, well, maybe there's something in, how they were raised or something. So,
Mm-hmm.
what is the other piece of the picture that I don't have that information helps. And also, but to not tolerate, we also want to have, set some boundaries and how
Right.
the framework for how you are suggesting that interaction is super helpful. Thank you. One of the things that's really, I think important to listeners too, is that this, the intent and impact as it relates also, that I feel like is a big life lesson that I learned at work that actually I brought to parenting. It was kind of a similar kind of a thing of realizing, that, I remember making a mistake at work, a good intent, and then realizing, oh, okay, now been on the other side of that. So sometimes that, happens with my kids where they like made mistakes, did something, and I'm like, oh, okay, I got mad, and then went, we had the conversation. So that was something I agree is like intent and impact, and to address both, and just how important it is to have that benefit of the doubt. So I guess, what about you? What has been a important, I don't know, either it's a story or defining moment that either from parenting that helped you at work, or something at work that really helped you in parenting?
Gosh, there's been lots of things. I have a teenager, and she's at that point now where, when she was younger, it was all, I love mom, and everything was awesome and fabulous. And she's got her own mind now and her own
Well, you
way of
said she's a
doing.
sophomore, so is she
She is. She's
15?
15.
Okay, yeah.
And um, I really had to understand who she was, because I'm my own person. She's her own person, and as they get up into the teenage years, you start to realize, no, she's her own person, and much like me as the manager, right? I can't force people to do things the way I would do them, or think the way I would think. And something that became really clear with me with my daughter, that I had to do with my own employees, right? When I manage people, and even people I influence, I had to understand, are they introvert? I'm extrovert. Are they analytical and I'm action oriented, right? All the things that we learned at Dale Carnegie, right? Just try to understand the other person more. I kind of took that into parenting, especially as she got older, is to kind of understand her. Who is she? And realize that she's very introverted, where I am very extroverted, which is killing me in this time of COVID.
Right.
But she is very introverted, and how that drives the decisions she makes and things she does. Like, she doesn't want to be around a whole lot of people, whereas I'm like, hey, the more the merrier. Let's do that. And taking that into account when she's doing something that I'm thinking there's a better way to do that, I have to remember, wait, is that a better way that I would do that? Or is that a better way for her to do
I love
that?
it. Your finger even comes out, it's so true. I always feel like, there's always like, tell clients, don't say should, I feel like you should know better by now. Like, we just get into that mode. So it's funny to see that, but, thank you. And that is an important piece. And you're showing that, that parenting and management skills, they do. The more we invest in one, it spills over and helps in the other. So any parenting book we read or any management book we read, we get a 2 for 1.
It's really just dealing with people, right? And our children, I mean, even the folks that we manage, we think we can wield certain power because we're in charge, but
yeah, and power is different than influence, right?
Yeah, most of the time that's not the best thing. That's not the best outcome. It's not the best for the long term, right? And I think it's the same way with kids. We could wield the power of, you won't do this, you won't do this. But I was a kid once too, and I know as soon as I'm not around, they're going to do it if that's what. So it's, in my opinion, it's more important to influence them to kind of think through what their decisions are and the consequences of those and things like that. So it's definitely not perfect. I only have one, and so one daughter. I've had lots of employees, but one daughter. I'm learning as I go. So,
what is your favorite Dale Carnegie principle as it relates to parenting?
Well, I used to think it was the get them to yes quickly one, right? Because as a parent, you're just super busy, and you kind of want that compliance with your kids, because you're kind of like, no, I need that done now. And so, get that to yes quickly thing. But honestly, the more I used that, the more I wondered if that was the right thing to do, because I need to invest the time for her to come to the decisions on her own. And I need to support if she's doing something, makes a decision that I think might have not the best outcome, but I have to be okay with letting her go with that. And then if it's not the best outcome, then just, kind of like my current boss, and I'd go into that coaching mode, like, well, how do you think that went?
Right.
And stuff, because I think she'll just learn more through that than she will if she's just going to comply with what I tell her to do.
Yeah, I had a moment where I was like, "Yay, okay, I'm sinking in with my kids." But my 16-year-old, I think this is the same thing, is like shifting, not from like do it because I want you to, but like let the other person feel the idea is theirs. But and
Right.
like you say, sometimes I've also realized, okay, I don't need, fine, if you're going to vacuum from the front of the room to the back of the room, that's different than how I would do it, or whatever. But I don't need to, I'm not going to fight about that because it's not worth it. I'm saving all my not fights, disagreements or whatnot for like safety stuff. But recently my son was going to be going with a friend to like jump off a bridge in the summer, into the water. And, I was like, oh, my alarm bells are going off. But he said, I was like, okay, well, and I asked the question, like, what do you think for safety? And he's like, always feet first, whatever. And he's like, Mom, I totally hear you. Like, you're right. Like, I don't want to get paralyzed either. Like, I want to protect my brain and my face. I'm going to make smart decisions. So I was like, okay, good. Like, it's not like my mom won't let me, I'm going to get my phone taken away or something, but it's like, I don't want to do this because I don't want to get injured or something like that. So
exactly.
Like, so maybe it's like
what's
think
important.
long-term, or, kind of in that thing where they say, teach a kid or give a person a fish, you feed them for a day, and teach them to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. It's kind of that same idea with parenting. It's like, okay, how do you get them to see the reason why we're saying, the things we do?
When they're 19 or 20 and they're off at college or wherever they're going to go, you don't want the only rule of thumb that they had was my mom and dad won't like that, because mom and dad are not there.
Yeah.
So I think the more we can instill, hey, have you thought about what could go wrong, or why are you doing that? What's your goal there? And stuff. I'm no expert, because I'm sure I'm messing it up here and there, but I'm wanting her to think beyond her action, and be willing to understand the consequences of a certain decision. And if that decision goes sideways, those consequences are there, so that she starts thinking. So later it's not a case of would my mom and dad be mad? It's more like you said, I don't want to do that because I could get hurt, or that's not the right thing to do.
Me. Yeah. Well, speaking of childhood and I remember you were such a defining moment for me of like why I feel so strongly about childhood stories, because I just gotten your form just had said like, my goal is to be more diplomatic, and your manager had said, she needs to be more diplomatic. She's very action oriented and whatnot. And then you told a story about, being in a military family and, raising your siblings. And I just felt like I wanted to push pause and like play that story for all your colleagues, your employees, your manager, and be like, here's where she is. This is why she is. Like if you just zoom out, it just helps people to like zoom out and see that whole picture of why and who people are. So I don't know if maybe you'll tell more about that story and how that relates, or if there's a different childhood story that, really was shaped your character, defining for you.
That was a defining moment for me too, because I want to say that was the beginning of me trying to look back into my past to try to understand who I was in the future. I think I came up with that story, to be honest with you, because I thought it was an entertaining story when we were doing, but it actually then resonated with me, like, you know what, that is why I am the way that I am. And so, I grew up in the military and the Navy, and I'm the oldest of 7 kids, so I was always left in charge, and learned things like accountability and stuff pretty fast, because you can't really blame your siblings for not doing stuff, because, your parents would say, I didn't leave them in charge, I left you in charge. And that was the beginning of me kind of looking back into my life and kind of understanding why I am the person, and something different, a different story for you. That I came to realize about myself, and that I share openly with people getting to know me, is that we were a submarine family. So we moved about every 18 months. And every time we went into a new school, we were the new kids and we were left out. We never got invited to the birthday parties or the skating parties and stuff because people didn't know us. And by the time they got to know us, it was time for us to move again. And so I am, as an adult, I am primarily motivated by relationships, right? Not power, not achievement. It's relationships. And the way that someone can crush me is to make me feel left out. And I think that goes back to the fact that I grew up always being the outsider, always being the new kid. And so I share that with people now because inclusion is such a big part of my life now, trying to understand diversity and inclusion and how we get towards equity. And I think about, I know what it feels like to be left out as a child. And I think that really became baggage I carried into my adult life, was when I don't feel like somebody actually is welcoming me in, it just takes the wind out of my sails. So something I learned from you all is to share that. To share that that's why I am what I am, right? And yes, I can keep working on it, but it's something that's been ingrained for me for decades. The thing I take away from that and the experience I had with you guys, Nikki, is that we have to be willing to kind of be introspective and kind of understand, why do I do that, right? Why am I bossy? Well, there's a reason for that. And I can always work on it, but I also have to understand that's part of who I am. Yeah. And why do I get crushed when I feel left out? I have to understand that there's reasons for that, and that's part of who I am.
And Dee, what's so inspiring about you is that you could also take that pain or that situation or that sensitivity and really just generate so much empathy from that, that you've done the work, that you're not resentful and, hey, forget it, I don't want to come to your birthday party, or I don't want to be included anyway, but you really respect how you've been able to just generate empathy and also help the organizations that you're a part of to have that sensitivity and make something good come from that. Not just for yourself, but for other people too. That speaks a lot to how generous and
yeah, I don't know about generous. I try to be, but I know that the more you make it okay for people to say, hey, this is how I am and why I am and who I am, and I'm willing to work on me, but also know that some of this is just part of me, right? Yeah. And I know that I appreciate it when someone shares something about them that kind of helps me understand why they do the things they do, or how they act, or how they react, or anything like that, because it helps me operate with them more efficiently, more effectively, communicate with them better, right? And to have that kind of empathy and understanding. Empathy, in my opinion, comes from understanding. And understanding really comes from that open communication and that vulnerability and ability to say. So you put me on that path. And so I've parlayed it over the last 6 or so years of just really trying to understand me, and then being open enough to get other people to help me understand them.
Awesome. Dee, if you were to wrap up, what practical wisdom would you give our listeners?
Oh gosh, I would say never stop learning, being open to something new, right? I think too often we get our own worldview, or we kind of get stuck in, this is even who I am. I think our brain has the capacity, it's a muscle, and it can get strong again. If it's been weak, it can learn new things. And so always be open to learning, because you'll never know when you're going to hear something that you're open to. You have to be open to it, or you might not even absorb it, right? And hear something that makes you think, I need to do something differently, and where that will take you, because there's lots of things that you planted the seed with the work I did in Dale Carnegie, the relationships I've made. I know you've had Sarah and Harpreet and a few others on this particular podcast. I've met most of them because of Dale Carnegie, or connections through them. You just never know when that seed's going to plant, and then what kind of growths are going to come from that, and where that's going to impact you. So be open to learning.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those seeds with our audience, maybe some nuggets that we can apply to, bring more of that value to those interviews, to be introspective, to be willing as managers to, share something, be vulnerable, tell a story, and, be more connected, have
Right.
more belonging or inclusivity. So thanks so much for
Yep.
being on the show.
You're welcome.